wine, martinis, shots. Today, there are hundreds of different drinks you might order from any given bartender. Drinking is a leisure activity that we use to relax, party, or escape. But it hasn't always been that way. Alcohol's forms and its uses have changed drastically through the ages. Here's the history you've never heard of. How long have humans been drinking alcohol? No one is sure, but the first signs of it show up around 7000 BC, likely originating somewhere in China. It's not actually until roughly 3200 BC that we find the first documented evidence of it, a pictograph from Mesopotamia of a clay vessel presumably holding beer. Alcohol is thought to have driven a significant portion of early societal development. Take bread, for instance. In 1877, an archaeologist named James Death suggested that the invention of beer preceded the invention of bread. That might mean that the reason we ever settled down into an agricultural lifestyle was to produce enough wheat for beer. And fun fact, the oldest recipe in the world that we know of is not for food, but how to make beer. But the beer then was pretty different from the beer we know today. It was thick, almost gruel-like, to the point where the Sumerians would drink it through a straw to filter out the bigger pieces. It might sound unappetizing, but it was an important source of calories and considered to be very nutritious. In fact, beer has been a staple for cultures around the world for centuries. In England between 1001 and 1500 AD, for example, ale was the common drink and was consumed by adults and children throughout the day. Wine arose a bit later, depending on where in the world you lived. In many cultures, it was considered a luxury reserved for the upper class. But for ancient Greece, it was a key part of society. In some parts of Greece, drinking was considered a civic duty, and those who didn't drink were said to be lethargic and smelly. Yes, really. The equal distribution of wine at feasts is even thought to be the basis for the concept of demokratia, which led to democracy. Despite the massive cultural developments that alcohol has spurred on, humanity has been struggling with its negative effects for a long while. The first recorded instance of alcohol control comes from Hammurabi's code around 1720 BC, which placed strict requirements on tavern keepers to avoid serving alcohol to criminals. Alcohol was a key part of bringing society together, but regulating its distribution was important to keeping the peace. For most of early history, alcohol was created through fermentation. But in the Middle Ages, the distillation process was introduced and slowly perfected. This brought on a host of new problems. At first, distilled liquor like brandy was first sold as a medicine to treat dozens of conditions. But by the end of the Middle Ages, around 1500 AD, distilled spirits were sold as drinks. Fast forward a few hundred years. Alcohol production had grown throughout the world. In 1690, though, it experienced a growth period when England put legislature in place that promoted distilling. The boom happened again in 1736 when Parliament passed legislation that said gin could only be sold in quantities of 2 gallons or more. The amount of alcohol consumed in people groups across the world continued increasing throughout the 1700s. Finally, in the early 1800s, things got complicated. People began reacting to the problems that alcoholism was causing in their communities. This is when the first modern temperance groups arose, which promoted moderation in drinking. And sure enough, in the early 1900s, countries across the world such as Russia, Norway, Iceland, Canada, and the United States established laws that made the possession of alcohol illegal. Instead of destroying the alcohol trade, however, its distribution was moved underground. The prohibition ushered in a period of black market alcohol, similar to the illegal drug market we see today. The alcohol bans did not last long. In the U.S., the prohibition ended in 1933. Since the prohibition was repealed, the public's view of alcohol has been gradually changing. Today, there are a few key developments that shape our current understanding of alcoholism. Alcohol is tied to society, oftentimes at the expense of society itself. The history of alcohol in humans is at least 30,000 and arguably 100,000 years long. Alcohol, a flammable liquid produced by the natural fermentation of sugars, is currently the most widely used human psychoactive agent around the world today, ahead of nicotine, caffeine, and betel nut. It was made and consumed by prehistoric societies in 6 of the 7 continents, not Antarctica, in a variety of forms based on a variety of natural sugars found in grains and fruits. The earliest possible moment that humans consumed alcohol is conjecture. The creation of alcohol is a natural process, and scholars have noted that primates, insects, and birds partake in accidentally fermented berries and fruit. While there is no direct evidence that our ancient ancestors also drank fermented liquids, it is a possibility we should consider. 100,000 years ago, theoretically, at some point, Paleolithic humans or their ancestors recognized that leaving fruit in the bottom of a container for an extended period of time leads naturally to alcohol-infused juices. 30,000 BCE. Some scholars interpret the abstract parts of Upper Paleolithic cave art as the work of shamans, religious specialists who were attempting to connect with natural forces and supernatural beings. Shamans work under altered states of consciousness, ASC, which can be created by chanting or fasting or aided by psychotropic drugs, like alcohol. Some of the earliest cave paintings suggest activities of shamans. Some scholars have suggested they reached ASC using alcohol. 25,000 BCE. The Venus of Lausel, found in a French Upper Paleolithic cave, is a carved representation of a woman holding what looks like a cornucopia or a bison horn core. Some scholars have interpreted it as a drinking horn. 13,000 BCE. To intentionally make fermented beverages, one needs a container where they may be stored during the process, and the first pottery was invented in China at least 15,000 years ago. 10,000 BCE. Grape pips attest to possible wine consumption at Frankthi Cave in Greece. 9th millennium BCE, the earliest domesticated fruit was the fig tree. 8th millennium BCE, the domestication of rice and barley, crops used for the production of fermented alcohol, occurred about 10,000 years ago. Alcoholic substances have intoxicating, mind-altering properties that might have been restricted to elites and religious specialists, but they were also used in the maintenance of social cohesion in the context of feasting available to everyone in a community. Some herb-based beverages may have been used for medicinal purposes as well. 7,000 BCE. The earliest evidence of wine production comes from jars at the Neolithic site of Jiahu in China, where residue analysis has identified a fermented concoction of rice, honey and fruit. 5400–5000 BCE. Based on the recovery of tartaric acid in ceramic vessels, people produced resinated wine, such as that on a fairly large scale at Haji Firuz Tepe, Iran. 4400–4000 BCE. Grape pips, empty grape skins, and two-handled cups at the Greek site of Dikili Tash are the earliest evidence for wine production in the Aegean Sea region. 4000 BCE. A platform for crushing grapes and a process to move crushed grapes to storage jars are evidence of wine production at the Armenian site of Areni 1. 4th millennium BCE. By the beginning of the 4th millennium BCE, wine and beer were produced in many locations. In Mesopotamia, Assyria and Anatolia, such as the Ubaid site of Tepe-Gawra, and treated as a trade and elite luxury good. At the same time, pre-dynastic Egyptian tomb paintings and wine jars are evidence of the local production of herb-based beers. 3400–2500 BCE. The pre-dynastic community of Hierakonpolis in Egypt had a large number of barley and wheat-based brewery installations. It is difficult to draw the line globally for the production of wine and beer explicitly for trade. It seems clear that alcohol was both an elite substance and one with ritual significance, and the liquids as well as the technology of making them was shared and traded across cultures fairly early on. 3150 BCE. One of the rooms of the tomb of Scorpion I, the earliest of the dynastic kings of Egypt, was stuffed with 700 jars believed to have been made and filled with wine in the Levant and shipped to the king for his consumption. 3300–1200 BCE. Wine consumption is in evidence. Used in ritual and elite contexts in early Bronze Age sites in Greece, including both Minoan and Mycenaean cultures. 1600–722 BCE. Cereal-based alcohol are stored in sealed bronze vessels of Shang ca. 1600–1046 BCE, and Western Zhou ca. 1046–722 BCE dynasties in China. 2000–1400 BCE. Textual evidence demonstrates that barley and rice beers, and others made from a variety of grasses, fruits and other substances, were produced in the Indian subcontinent at least as long ago as the Vedic period. 1700–1550 BC. Beer based on the locally domesticated sorghum grain is manufactured and becomes ritually important in the Kerma dynasty of the Kushite kingdom of present-day Sudan. 9th century BCE. Chicha beer, made from a combination of maize and fruit, is a significant part of feasting and status differentiation throughout South America. 8th century BCE. In his classic tales, the Iliad, and the Odyssey, Homer prominently mentions the wine of Pramnos. 8th–5th centuries BCE. The Etruscans produced the first wines in Italy. According to Pliny the Elder, they practice wine blending and create a muscatel-type beverage. 600 BCE. Marseille is founded by the Greeks who brought wines and vines to the great port city in France. 530–400 BCE. Grain beers and mead produced in Central Europe, such as barley beer at Iron Age Hochdorf in what is today Germany. 500–400 BCE. Some scholars, such as Fr. Alchin, believe that the first distillation of alcohol might have occurred as early as this period in India and Pakistan. 425–400 BCE. Wine production at the Mediterranean port of Latara in southern France marks the beginning of the wine industry in France. 4th century BCE. The Roman colony and competitor of Carthage in North Africa has an extensive trade network of wine and other goods all over the Mediterranean region, including a sweet wine made from sun-dried grapes. 4th century BCE. According to Plato, strict laws in Carthage forbid the drinking of wine for magistrates, jury members, counselors, soldiers, and ship's pilots while on duty, and for enslaved people at any time. The empires of Greece and Rome are largely responsible for the international commercialization of the trade in many different goods, and specifically in the production of alcoholic beverages. 1st–2nd centuries BCE, the Mediterranean wine trade explodes, bolstered by the Roman Empire. 150 BCE 350 CE, distillation of alcohol is a common practice in northwest Pakistan. 92 CE, Domitian forbids the planting of new vineyards in the provinces because the competition is killing the Italian market. 2nd century CE, Romans begin cultivating grapes and producing wine in Mosel Valley of Germany, and France becomes a major wine-producing region. 4th century CE, the process of distillation is possibly re-developed in Egypt and Arabia. 150 BCE 650 CE, pulque, made from fermented agave, is used as a dietary supplement at the Mexican capital city of Teotihuacan. 300 to 800 CE, at classic period Maya feasts, participants consume bulch made from honey and bark, and chicha maize-based beer. 500–1000 CE, chicha beer becomes a significant element of feasting for the Tiwanaku in South America, evidenced in part by the classic Quiro form of flared drinking goblet. 13th century CE, pulque, an alcoholic beverage made from fermented agave, is part of the Aztec state in Mexico. 16th century CE, production of wine in Europe moves from monasteries to merchants. Do not forget to subscribe, like, share and leave us your comment. Thanks for watching.